Dan, Lindsay, and T.J. Martin, directors of the HBO documentary Tina, which premiered last March. Welcome. Very nice to talk to you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of this documentary. I'm very excited to sit down and talk to you about it.
Thank you.
So, what was it about this Tina Turner documentary, this moment in time, that spurred you both to create this? How did you get involved in it, and why? Why now?
Well, I mean, the how we got involved was the producers, Simon Chin and Jonathan Chin, had produced our last film, LA '92, and we had kind of finished up, the release of that and whatever award stuff and whatnot. And we happened to find ourselves in London, having lunch with Simon, and he told us that he was leaving the next day to go meet with Tina Turner to kind of finalize a deal to do a documentary on her life. And TJ and I both remarked later in our minds, we were just like, oh, cool. I wonder who's going to make that. Like, we just it never even entered our mind that we would do it, or that, that Simon and Jonathan would, think about us for it. So we were kind of surprised a few weeks later when they reached out to us and said, would you be interested? And we were hesitant actually at first. We had some, just knowing, like a lot of people, I guess, knew the broad strokes of Tina's story. Knowing just that, we were kind of, was it right for two men to be the conduits to tell this story? But I think we kind of started diving into the research, and I think a big thing for us was, and I don't know that this answers the why now necessarily in terms of Tina's story, but the why for us, if that makes any sense,
Sure.
was, we've been approached several times to do either a music doc or something that is kind of like an iconic person. And, in general, this isn't always the case, but in general, a lot of those projects we find are kind of trading on the notoriety or the nostalgia factor of somebody, and there isn't really a proper like cinematic story. And obviously Tina's life is not, it offers a very cinematic story. In fact, it's such a saga and such a journey that, in many ways you need 10 hours to properly tell it. But yeah, I think we just, we were aware that other versions of her story were out there, but we just felt like ultimately that the documentary form really offered a way to tell her story that other forms didn't, and with a kind of intimacy and most importantly, being able to tell it through Tina's voice. We just figured that would be a really powerful piece. And then, it wasn't until then we went and met Tina that we really kind of started to formulate what the actual direction of the film would be.
So, TJ, tell me about that moment when you sat down with Tina Turner. Tell me what it was like being with that icon in the room.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think just generally speaking, in order to like do our jobs, you kind of have to like push all the push the celebrity out of your head. Otherwise, you kind of will get paralyzed like a deer in headlights. But there's no doubt that you're well aware that Tina she's not just an icon, but she means so much to like as a cultural figure, but also to her fans. She means a lot to a lot of different people. And so you do go into it kind of knowing that you kind of have to handle her story with care. So in meeting her, I think it's a little, there's a little bit of anxiety in that sense, knowing like it's the beginning of preserving the legacy of Tina Turner. But then you meet her, and she's totally disarming. She's a real, like, genuine joy to be around. We always say I hate it when like someone says a celebrity is down to earth, but she's legitimately like down to earth. The first time, as Dan has mentioned before, the first time we actually met her was in her house in Zurich. We had a couple of meetings and a dinner with her husband prior to meeting Tina, and by the time that we met them one afternoon in her house, we were having tea with Erwin, and we could hear her coming down the stairs, and I couldn't see her, but Dan could see her come in, and she just kind of entered the room, and the first thing she said was, there's a book, there's a film, and now there's a musical. What the hell are we going to do a documentary about? And Dan quickly, well, that's kind of what we're here. We were going to ask you the same thing. And I think that broke the ice and allowed us to kind of just engage in a really casual way. And once we kind of started talking with her, it's some of the revelations in that very first conversation, this notion that she's still actually processing the trauma. We didn't have to bring up Ike. She kind of just started talking about it. And then when she talked about it, she mentioned that if she spends too much time thinking or talking about that time in her life, he comes back in nightmares, which is essentially PTSD. And I think for us, that was a big revelation and something we couldn't shake, that fundamentally helped inform the POV of the film and the take that we ended up going in.
Yeah, and that's why I think this documentary is such a revelation, in that it does dive into her feelings of those. I mean, you know the moments from the film, right? Everybody knows the story. Everybody knows how she got her start. People understand what happened with Ike, but they don't understand necessarily how she's still dealing with that. I did not expect her to still be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which is fully evident right there, as she goes through the documentary, as she talks about her experience. You can tell that she is suffering from PTSD. And there's other things like her experiences with her mother, relationship to that. I mean, there's just a lot of things that I learned about her as a person, where I was happy to see her. I'm happy to see her in love with Erwin, but I'm also sad to know that she's still struggling with that she, that is something that still lingers. That specter of Ike is still there in her life. That's why I said earlier, it was sadness, and it was a revelation for me because of those topics. But did you have any sort of preconceived notions of her that changed as you went into making the documentary?
I don't know. I mean, I think we probably had some preconceived ideas that I think are similar to, you were just saying that you didn't expect her to still be, kind of dealing with post-traumatic stress, and we were the same way, but in some ways then we were kind of like, well, that's kind of naive. Like, of any person who suffers that kind of trauma, you don't heal, you don't necessarily like get over that. It's a process of surviving each day. And I think the fact that it was, a revelation, so to speak, to us, informed us like, oh, we need to dive into that in the film, because I think it's a revelation for a lot of people. I think the other thing too is just, you also mentioned, like, we kind of all know the beats of the story. And I think we also entered it thinking that same thing. And then, we realized after talking to people younger than us, like, it's more of a generational thing. It was really intriguing, actually, to like, TJ and I, to out us, are both in our 40s, and our friends that are like in their early 30s and stuff, like, they're like, oh yeah, I mean, I know who Tina Turner is, she's got some hits, and like, but they knew nothing about her story. So it was difficult in that way. We had to find a way to balance, like, oh, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to watch this that actually don't know all of this in the way, but then there's gonna be a lot of people that know all of it. So how do you do that? And so, sorry, but I think that is the biggest revelation, was we had the same, I think, construction of her in our minds that a lot of people do, is that she is, it is the construction of the icon, right? Where she is just this idea of strength and resilience. And I think once we met her and talked to her and understood the human being behind that, that was the greatest revelation for us, the biggest misconception that we had going into it.
Yeah. I even picked up on things that I didn't, outside of that, I picked up on things I didn't know about, like the whole conversation about River Deep Mountain High, which is one of my all-time favorite songs, top 10 favorite songs for sure. Not, yeah, I guess I had known at some point that it really wasn't as big of a success back then as it is considered now. And then hearing Ike talk about, they don't play this on, white radio stations won't play it because it's too black. Black radio stations won't play it because it's too white. That's just such it was so fascinating to me. So I praise you guys for that, for bringing stuff like that to the forefront, because it not only gave me additional insight into her, but it gave me additional insight into her own music, the legacy of her music. But when you sought to shape the documentary, what most informed the story that you wanted to tell?
Yeah, it's interesting. That question's interesting coming off the heels of kind of your insights about River Deep, because as Dan mentioned, like to really fully do Tina's story justice, you should probably do like a 10-part series, right? Every chapter of her life should be its own film. And specifically, her legacy and influence in the musical space. That's something this particular film doesn't spend too much time exploring. I think for us, this was always an opportunity to kind of really allow Tina to tell Tina's story through her own voice. And what we realize, a lot of the tension that she has beyond kind of still, choosing to survive every day and processing her past, is a lot of that stems from being coming face to face with the narrative of her story frequently, and people almost and in the film it's characterized by the media, but really they're kind of a stand-in for the public, of almost kind of keeping her locked into a singular narrative and not allowing her to grow. So for us, how we started shaping and looking at the film was thinking about it as two main characters. There's Tina Turner, and then there's the narrative of Tina Turner. So what you watch is the origin of these two stories, and then eventually they kind of the tension between the two, and eventually they cross paths. And that's, it was very much a discovery for us when we started thinking about that, because they both have their own full arcs that come to a place where you start to realize what Tina's actually pursuing is the ability to retire from the persona and the narrative of Tina. And that was just also it was just something that was deeply interesting to us. But as we kind of continue to flesh it out, we also realized it served two core critical purposes, which was, that's a facet and a point of view that we'd never seen. There's a book, there's a People magazine article, there's movie, there's multiple like TV specials, there's a musical. That was a POV we'd never really seen explored within the context of Tina's life. But more importantly, it felt very true. I mean, we realized afterwards, because she told us that the film felt very accurate, but it felt very true to, again, her point of view of her own life and her own experiences. And at the end of the day, it's we're just a conduit for her to kind of express herself.
As I look back over the documentary, there are a lot of personal revelations in there. There's a lot of personal conversations. There's a lot of pain on display there. Did you have final cut?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we wouldn't have gone into it if we didn't know that we were just going to be able to make the film that we wanted to make. But I will say that, even on top of that, you still feel the weight of like, that this is somebody who is very iconic. And but what was interesting is, Tina's intention with this was to allow us to make the film. And that was the first thing that her and her husband Erwin said, that you're the filmmakers, we're not going to so they never, Tina didn't see the film until it was finished. and and I guess Erwin didn't see the film until, or maybe, no, I'm sorry, we showed Erwin like basically the final cut, but before we had like finished, like done the finishing, just so that if there was anything that was egregious, and we had some other people that, you know, we obviously wanted to screen it to make sure things were accurate. And but no, yeah, no, ultimately this was the film that we wanted to make.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned there's a lot of pain in the film. It was actually something near later in the process that we kind of, you know, I think naturally as filmmakers, you know, pain equals conflict. So you're like that's the critical part of making, right? Is conflict. But I think at a certain point we actually started realizing, you know, it's, you know, that when we talk about trauma, it's just not the Ike days. It kind of runs deeper into her childhood and what she kind of witnessed between her own parents and this feeling of abandonment from her mom. And it's a subtle POV shift, but I think it actually kind of it changed, it like fundamentally changed the tone of the film, which is it's navigating trauma, but really, and this might be semantics, but it's really a pursuit of love. And I think that may be the thing that you know, seemingly people are resonating with the film. So I wonder, and it makes me wonder if that's part of the thing that has deeper resonance is we all face obstacles in our life, but what she's doing, there's this constant pursuit of familial love, romantic love, and love of self and love of your own narrative. And that ends up being kind of the dominant, everything kind of falls under that umbrella. And that's just something that like, we didn't really kind of, that was our own revelation in the process of making it. It kind of subtly shifted the way in which you look at Tina's story.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that. And certainly, you know, by the time you get to the end, she is talking a lot about her relationship to Erwin. And, you know, when she comes, there's a great moment when she comes to New York to the premiere of the Tina Turner musical. And there she is standing up on stage. And it's just like, here's these, you know, 50 plus decades standing right there. And, you know, this is where it's all led to. This is, you know, there have been so many great moments along the way, but you do get a sense that this is the culmination of a lot. You know, she is still there. She is still in her 80s, standing on that stage, and you know, despite all of the obstacles that have been put in her way. I mean, it does end on a great note. I commend you for that.
With her, by the way, hugging a version of herself,
yes.
which is
Adrienne
always,
Warren. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, you know, we had way more meta versions of this film where the musical and the movie were way more interconnected. But that moment always, to me at least, is always really moving, because I think of it as there, you know, she's obviously very blatantly talking about acceptance and that stuff, but there's something about her hugging Adrienne dressed as herself always symbolizes to me this idea of like, of that acceptance and self-love.
Yeah. I'd like to get a little technical for a second. Tell me about assembling all of this archival footage. I mean, you must have had thousands of hours to comb through to pick the right moments. Talk to me about what went into that process.
Yeah, that's always hard to, I don't know how to synthesize that process, because it's, you just kind of have to dive in. I mean, look, in terms of, you know, we have to give a ton of credit to our co-producer and archivist, Ben Piner, just because he has a gift for finding really unique archive. And then, you know, and the second big thing is just figuring out a way in the system to organize it. But we like to organize it so there's redundancies to kind of accommodate everyone's, you know, different way of operating. But you know, I honestly, it's the I think from the jump, it was making sure that we're going from Tina's lens first. So starting with stuff like, you know, we were really grateful to have access to the Kurt tapes and also Carl Arrington's tapes that eventually came in after Kurt's tapes. But thinking about making sure that I think there's two things. One is making sure that we're always looking through a scene through the POV of Tina, and it's not about you know, as you notice, the film's not populated with like experts or a bunch of other like musical colleagues. It was always supposed to be through different iterations of Tina, either Tina herself or people who have told her story and or like Angela Bassett, who's embodied Tina. So it's almost like these scribes who've been kind of embodied her journey. So always looking at it through that lens. In some of the first archive that we had was Bob Gruen's photographs in in some of the like Super 8 and video he shot in the early 70s when he spent like 2-3 years with Ike and Tina, and that kind of unrefined aesthetic felt really intimate to us. So that combined with the Kurt tapes, and then when we met with Rhonda Graham, we came to realize over time that she fancied herself an amateur photographer. And you know, at a certain point in the meeting with her, she's like, "Yeah, I've got some photo albums." And then she pulled out just album after album after album that were labeled chronologically, like 1964, 65, 66, 67, 68. And same thing, the photos were very intimate, and there's kind of a candid quality to them. So the combination of Bob Gruen's stuff, the Kurt tapes, and Rhonda's material started actually shaping the identity of, like, the visual identity of the film. And we wanted to make sure that we stayed in that kind of pocket. So, because I think on the outside, if you said you're making a film about Tina Turner, I think the immediate response is something a little bit more glitzy, glamorous, kind of poppy. And we wanted to make sure that, you know, the first early materials that we got felt like it was already shaping the identity of it. So we try to keep it within a certain, to try to keep it within a certain aesthetic intimacy. And that, the reason I say all that is because that certainly informed how you keep developing the body and the language of the film. It has to stay within an intimate kind of box of sorts.
And yeah, like what archive we were after.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So how many hours in total was it? Is that even a quantifiable number?
I mean, I think I read somewhere on like the press notes, it's like 2,500 hours. I don't know. I honestly don't even know how, but you know, there's a lot of that is like, I think that's probably somebody went through the amount of media and figured out like what.
Just added it
and
up.
So there's, you know, I mean, we had hundreds of hours of just audio tapes of like, you know, so but it was an immense amount of archive. And to TJ's point, I mean, part of it, you know, it's also our editors that we collaborated with, Carter Gunn and Taryn Gold, you know, like it's just everyone's looking at stuff and trying to pull out, you know, a lot of times we just literally practically like make sequences called gems, and you just throw things in those sequences and you can always go back and but there's, you know, there's so much that we couldn't include that is also incredible.
How long was your first cut?
It took a long.
This was.
Yep.
I was gonna say it's probably the shorter of a first assembly, right? Like Undefeated was like 5.5 hours. LA 92 was, I think, like 4 hours. This first assembly was probably closer to 3.5. Wow. But I think it was also just. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I don't even know if we ever got like actual full. I'll bet you the time we actually had a full assembly, which actually was probably closer to like just over 2 hours. I mean, it took us this was a really, really deceivingly difficult film to construct. I think we put all of our producing partners through several heart attacks. But you know, it was, and so I don't think really the ending, we never even really fully constructed it until we had figured out. We spent so much. I mean, TJ, I think at one point sent version like 60 of the opening or something like that, like V60. Like it was just like crazy how much material was cut for this. So it was late in the process, don't you think, TJ, that we finally had like a full, like from beginning to end, like this is the story.
Yeah, no, there's also just archive was trickling in like up till the very, very end.
Mm-hmm. So, final question for you. So viewers have come in, they've watched this, they've watched the story of a woman who is a survivor, who continues to thrive, who has found happiness and peace, and love at last in her life. What is the thing that you hope people take away from her from this documentary in terms of her, in terms of Tina, the person that they have known so many years?
I mean, that's a really hard question to answer, and it should be easy because we made the film and you think there's an intention behind, like, but it's so, I think I grew to appreciate so much the complexity of her and her story, and I think I fully now understand why she means so much and so many different things to so many different people. But I will say, for me personally, what I find myself thinking about at the end really is the remarkable aspect of her as a human being, to be, right, I mean, this narrative, right, of like born as, the daughter of sharecroppers in Tennessee, and now lives in a castle in Zurich by a lake. I mean, that's like, that doesn't happen often. But it's what made that happen is Tina's ability to kind of envision a thing that she wants in life. And then to, even though she is oftentimes was in a society or systems that told her what she thought she wanted wasn't what she should have, and she just did it. It's like, what's the Elizabeth Warren thing? And yet she persisted. Mm-hmm. That to me is the thing that's amazing, is her ability to just kind of like move forward and carve out the space for her, for the things she wanted to do. It's like, it's not only moving, but it's inspiring as well. And I think, I mean, I would hope that's something that people take away from it. I don't know, sure. TJ?
I mean, look, people are gonna, I don't want to impose my ideas of what someone should extract from a piece of work, but I actually, I agree a lot with Dan. I think one of the things that I feel, I guess I would hope is, I think it's how can you, it's in the process of trying to humanize her, right? For better or for worse, she became an icon, which then is she represents an idea, and we lost sight of the fact that she may have her own struggles. But in the process of humanizing her, I think there's probably more relatability. And I find myself even more impressed by the action she took to pursue a better, not just her vision, but also to pursue a healthier, better life for herself, for her spirit, for her mind, for her being. And that level of commitment to self love, whether she wants to define it like that or not, I feel is infectious. And I admire her that much more now that I've kind of taken her off the pedestal and recognize that she's just a human, just like any of us. The other thing I would say, just because the film doesn't talk about it, it's just very present, is you forget how incredible of a performer she is. Like, hands down.
Yeah.
And we let scenes kind of play out. Instead of having people say that, we just kind of let you experience it. I definitely hope that people take away with a real appreciation for not just the energy, but how kind of unique her choreography is and how kind of different she was in that era. I grew an immense amount of appreciation for that.
Oh yeah, I mean the Proud Mary sequence alone, where she's spinning around in the dress. I mean, it's iconic. I mean, people use that word so much, but really that is iconic, right? I mean that has impacted decades of fans and artists. I mean, just that moment where she spins around, it's fantastic. It's insane. But Dan, Lindsay, and TJ Martin, directors of the brilliant HBO documentary, Tina, thank you so much for the time. And if you ever decide that you want to get into narrative features, I absolutely want a sequel to What's Love Got to Do with It. I think there's so much material post that film, because when that film, that's one of the things that bothered me after watching this, is that film just ends and you think, oh, it's all great now. And it really isn't. And there's so much left of her story to tell when after that film ends, as great as that film is. But I think Angela Bassett would be great to do it again. And I got to get her that Oscar.
I'll definitely agree with the last part. Got to get her that Oscar.
Yeah. And hopefully the Tonys will actually have their ceremony so we can get Adrienne Warren the Tony that she deserves. Anyway, thank you both for the time.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Take care.